Hello, friends, and welcome to the October 8th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Adnip, your host and Texas Impact's Outreach Director, and today's episode is being brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas. And I want to thank you for joining our second episode of our Gearing Up Texas Impact Faith Priorities for the 2021 Texas Legislative Session Weekly Witness Live Series. That's a mouthful. This week, we are going to be talking about climate justice, and I am really excited about the panel that we have lined up for you today. But before we jump in, we have just a couple of quick announcements. First, we have been in awe of the response for our Faith and Democracy events, with events so far in Dallas, Houston, Corpus Christi, and Huntsville. Those are all going to be on our Weekly Witness podcast feed, as well as our YouTube channel. So make sure you go check those out, share with your friends and congregations, and smash that subscribe button while you're at it to make sure you don't miss any quality content. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation this series of conversations as we lay out our legislative agenda for the next session. But y'all, it's election season. Early voting in Texas, if you're watching live, starts next Tuesday, October 13th. And if we want to be successful advocates in the Texas legislature, we have to do everything that we can now to ensure that we have a safe, fair, and accountable election in 2020, and that our networks are active and engaged. And Texas Impact has been working with you, been working with your congregations over the course of the last few months through our Texas Faith Votes campaign. You can find all kinds of resources at texasimpact.org. Click on the Texas Faith Votes link. And we've been talking about that all summer. And many of you have responded in incredible ways. But I want to highlight two opportunities for you today. First, we're encouraging people to serve in election 2020 as trained, nonpartisan poll monitors. So you can sign up to get more information about that. Sign up, get trained, sign up for some shifts, and make a difference that way. We also introduced this week a new voting flow chart to help you make sure that you and your networks understand how the election process is working this year. So again, check texasimpact.org, click on the Texas Faith Votes link. If you've been waiting to get involved, for real, y'all, now is the time. The world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. We need to raise our voices in this election, and we need to work to make sure that it's done in a safe and fair way. If you have questions, you can always reach out to me at scott@texasimpact.org. And I know we have all been on plenty of Zoom meetings over the course of the last few months. But one last reminder, since we are live today, at the bottom of your screen, you'll have a chat button that you can use. We're using that as a water cooler type talk. Remember that you can either send comments just to the panel or to all attendees. I'd encourage you, if you're saying something, to send it to all attendees. If you have a question specifically for the Q&A portion of this, you can post that in the Q&A feature, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end today. We are broadcasting right now on Facebook Live. This will be uploaded in the Texas Impact Weekly Witness podcast feed, so make sure that you're sharing this content with your friends, networks, and congregations. Use the hashtag Texas Faith Votes to share your favorite quotes or challenges for your networks. So with all of that, I am excited. Oh, and I'm going to give Mel a chance at the end to give an announcement that he wanted to make sure that we plug today about an upcoming event that 40% of our panel will be participating in soon. So Mel, let's remember that at the end.
In fact, it's already in the chat.
All right. So if you're watching online right now, live, check the chat. But joining us for today's conversation, we have with us Texas Impact's Executive Director, Bee Moorhead. Hey, Bee. She's muted, but she also says hey.
Sorry, hi.
We have with us, who you've already heard from, Reverend Mel Caraway, one of Texas Impact's board members. Hey, Mel. We have with us Doug Lewin with Stoic Energy. Hey, Doug.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And joining us from outside of the great state of Texas, we have Reverend Malcom with the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Reverend Malcom, thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, glad to be here with you all.
All right. So we're going to start out with Bee today. So last week we had our first episode kind of giving a high-level overview of the 2021 legislative priorities for Texas Impact. And This week, we're going to be digging a little deeper in the first of our 4 priority categories related to climate justice. So, what legislative issues are related to climate justice, and why is that issue such an important priority for Texas Impact?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm super excited that our legislative agenda now has the term climate justice in it. I think, like a lot of faith communities, Texas Impact spent, the past 20 years kind of investigating and chewing on issues of energy and climate and environment. And I think the legislative agenda this year represents a pretty mature idea of what goes in those categories now. So we have basically 3 sets of issues. One has to do with energy and utilities. One has to do with water, which is, of course, a huge issue climate-wise in Texas and also globally. And the third is climate resilience. One of the things that I would say is a distinctive this year of our climate agenda is an attention to affordability and impact on low-income communities generally. So I think that a common critique has often been that they kind of didn't put issues of poverty together with issues of climate justice. But I think our favorite Rev Malcom is going to let us know in a minute how tightly connected those things are. Another thing that I would say is that we've got some particular attention to process and the way that processes in the state happen that keep the public engaged in policymaking around energy, water, disaster response, and environmental enforcement. So I would say the most important thing that I can tell you about our legislative agenda around climate is we see it as an overarching issue and an intersectional issue. And to the extent that climate impacts other issues like health, food, disaster response, we've tried to draw those connections specifically. To the extent that it impacts particular parts of state government, we've tried to include those things too. So hopefully we've done a thorough job. And I will just add that for folks who are listening to the podcast rather than watching the Zoom, which I'm about to put this link in the chat, but the Texas Impact's legislative agenda is at texasimpact.org, our website. You can find the link on the homepage, but the link is 2021-2022 legislative platform. So hopefully folks will take a look. I'm going to put the link in here now. And once you ask some of these experts how they can help us think through our thinking.
All right, so thanks, Bee. We'll move next to Reverend Malcom. And Reverend Malcom, you are a national leader in climate justice and a friend of Texas Impact. In fact, I don't think we've met until today, but I feel like I know you from watching Texas Impact's climate change video series, The Path of Hope. So thanks for your work on that. So we're hearing more and more that climate justice goes hand in hand with racial justice. What does that mean, and why does it matter right now?
Well, when we look at climate justice, it's defending the most vulnerable amongst us, whether it be vulnerability in climate or in people. We're defending what's most vulnerable. We understand that racism is at the heart or in the fabric of every institution in our society. And we understand that the most vulnerable amongst us are the ones that are hurting the most. But we also understand from the science that the same things that cause the traumatic experiences for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor people's lives are the same things that cause the devastation for the planet as well. And so to look at that through the lens of racial justice, you can't get to climate justice without correcting the racial lens as well. So they're very much interconnected. And I want to loop back into something that Bee said a little while ago, or hinted to, with the economic impact. I think that you can't get away with saying Black Lives Matter if you don't look out for the economic life of Black people. One of the things that I've discovered in doing research throughout the South is that we suffer disproportionately from energy burdens. And can I be honest with you all and say, if I look at things from a long-term perspective, you can kill me and I'll be okay. But if you starve me, that's prolonged death. And a lot of communities are starving, and it's because of energy burdens. It's because of their utilities. When you pay 19% of your income going towards utilities, that's slow death. That's slow violence. Most states in the South don't necessarily have pervasive weatherization programs. And not having these weatherization programs, they hinder people from getting out of this cycle of poverty. If they would just put weatherization alone in place, you can save up to 35% on a lot of these vulnerable houses and households. So when we look at the violence and the racial tension of what's happening, you can't help but to see the connection, whether it be climate, whether it be police brutality, whether it be high utility burdens, whether it be the pollution that's happening in our community. It all boils down to those three words that we heard in 2014 and the three words that we heard in 2020. One was from Eric Garner and the other one was from George Floyd. I can't breathe. That sums up the Black experience. I can't breathe. And it's up for us as those who know better to love our neighbor enough to look and not see people, or not see people, but to see them for who they are and see them for where they are, and look at the systems that cause them to be who they are and where they are, and start correcting those systems or replace those systems in a whole lot of cases.
Thank you. Next up, we're going to turn to Doug. And as we were preparing for this today, I was reminded of a conversation we had on Weekly Witness. I don't even remember when it was now. I meant to look that up. But pre-COVID, you and I had a conversation about climate justice. And what I really appreciated about that conversation, as somebody who grew up in a family that was supported by the oil and gas industry, I really appreciated the messaging you had on climate justice, specifically for a Texas audience. You're an energy policy professional and also a person of faith. So how does this legislative agenda land with you? And are there issues where you hope faith communities will step forward?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, no thanks for putting me after Reverend Malcom. I really appreciate your words, Reverend, and inspiring and thought-provoking. And to answer, what's that?
I just have to say, I had the choice of you or my boss or a board member, so you seemed like the appropriate.
So I have the least power in this situation. I see. That's all right. No, this is great. I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk about these things. These things are so important, and the Reverend really teed them up beautifully. This climate justice agenda that Texas Impact has put out, I think is very important, and I think we're actually at a moment right now in the state of Texas where there's a tremendous potential for this. I actually listened this morning to a series of conversations among a lot of the biggest oil and gas companies in Houston this morning at a Center for Houston's Future event. And it's striking to hear them talking about decarbonization and all of these things. and the conversation has shifted so much, so quickly. It can kind of make your head spin. I think, though, we still have a long way to go to address all the important issues Reverend Malcom just talked about. And Bee, I'm gonna follow up with you later and talk about this too. I think under your energy and utilities piece, you have update the state's clean energy goals. One clean energy goal we have in Texas, and we've had for a really long time. We've had it for 20 years, is an energy efficiency. Reverend Malcom talked about weatherization, and I want to talk about this for a minute because I think this is so key to the words he spoke. I can't breathe. Right there, if you are inside your home, and that home is in a fence line community, or not even in a fence line community, maybe just near a highway, like so many folks in Texas, that those are the communities they live in. And if your home has gaps in between the window and the wall, if you're not well insulated, you're pulling that air into your home. And children, as we know, children, elderly, I mean, everybody, but especially children and elderly are deeply affected by pollution, like particulate matter and things like this. Not to get too into the weeds or technical, but just the stuff that's coming out of tailpipes of cars and trucks, things that are coming from coal plants, petrochemical facilities, all that. So there's an energy savings benefit to doing weatherization. There's also a very real, tangible impact to the people inside of that home. And here's the beauty of this. This is not a situation where we're talking about trading off different things. Those are jobs we're creating when we're weatherizing homes. Those are jobs that cannot be outsourced to another country. Those are good paying, often union jobs. They're electricians, they're construction workers. There are many different campaign plans that include weatherizing millions of homes. We need to really get serious about that. We need to increase the portion of the energy efficiency funding overall, and then increase within that the percentage that is going to help low-income communities. You mentioned I'm a person of faith. Like, we all have a responsibility as people of faith to take care of our neighbors, the least of these. All of this matters a lot. There's more I could say, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that. And I would just say, I think that this legislative agenda is a fantastic one. And I think there's the opportunity to drill deeper into some of these individual things and really bring forward a lot of things Reverend Malcom was talking about. The last thing I'll say before I turn it back over to you is I hope folks noticed that yesterday, actually, the House Democratic Caucus put out a climate plan, sort of an outline of a climate plan, some of the major elements that they want to focus on. I hope that we'll see Republicans do similar things. We all need to be working on climate. How do we decarbonize and how do we increase justice? And I'm really excited to see the House Democratic Caucus for the first time in Texas that I think any caucus has directly addressed these issues. And I've been working at this for a while, so it really is. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. And finally, we'll turn to Mel and Reverend Mel Caraway. As the past president of Texas Impact, you've been one of the driving forces behind our climate advocacy since day one. So how does this legislative agenda represent an evolution from our earliest work on climate? And if you had to pick one issue related to climate to focus on in 2021, what would you choose?
Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And I'm going to draw on some things that Bee and Michael and Doug all said. I think we need to look at our legislative agenda for 2021, 2022 in a historical perspective and where we have come from. And one of the things that I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit for is that we have been on the cutting edge of a positive climate justice legislative agenda for a long time. 15 years ago, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. we had already begun production of the breath of life. You couldn't see that when I held it up, but anyway, when you said I can't breathe, it was all about clean air for Texas. And the subtitle of that was Clearing Texas Air One Congregation at a Time, which brings into play the faith-based perspective on clean air and how important it is. Because if we can't breathe, we're not here. We rolled Breath of Life out at a conference 2.5 months after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And what we did at that conference and what we did through Breath of Life was, whether it was intentional or not, we wove together the intersectionality of climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, health justice, all into one package. And we have been doing that at Texas Impact ever since. And so when you said, where did we come from? What's our history? I think that's the genesis of it. And we have been on the cutting edge in advocating for climate, racial, economic, health justice throughout our entire existence, but especially in the last 15 years. Back then, we were looking at how refineries were located primarily in communities of color, Port Arthur, and how the air was untenable to breathe, how the smelters in Dallas made the air untenable to breathe, poisonous, how flaring has taken place, and the methane emissions, which have caused a great deal of health problems, and those continue. We're getting rid of coal power plants, which has been part of our agenda for a long time. We're making strides, but it takes time. And it's sad to say that we can't accomplish it all overnight. And we have been making incremental progress for the last 15 years. What do I see as the most important thing in our current? Wow. It's interesting because when we look at our legislative priorities, climate justice spills out into many other areas. If you look at the very last issue in economic justice, in the subdivision on health, restore the protection of the health and welfare of Texas citizens to the mission statement of the TCEQ. Things like that. Clean air, clean water. We have been at the forefront in the water fight in Texas to make sure that there is good, clean water available. And what many of our legislators don't take into account, their philosophy is all regulation is bad. And regulation serves a purpose. It protects the least and the lost among us. It protects the future development. So regulations are important, and our regulatory environment needs to be updated. It needs to be enforced. And I think that's one of the major things in our legislative priorities that I would focus on.
So Thanks. So let me ask the whole panel, and I'll remind folks who are listening in the webinar that you're welcome to send questions using the Q&A feature. I'll see if I have mad enough skills to be able to check the comments of Facebook Live and let you post questions there as well. No promises, but you can try. So to the entire panel, I seem to remember when I was interning with Texas Impact way back in the day that the conversation then was like,
I was a child back then.
We were all children, Mel. That the conversation, the fight was whether or not we should like believe that the climate change was real, right? It seems to me that the time for that conversation is way past, like 15 years ago, right? And the conversation we need to be having now is, what do we do, right? We have fires in California. I live 100 miles from the coast in Texas, and our community's flooded multiple times over the course of the last few years. Like, this is here, it's real, it's now. So the Weekly Witness community will always want me to ask our panelists, what do we do, right? What steps do you hope people will take in the weeks and months to come? And I'm just going to open that up to the panel. Any takers?
I'll start with that would be, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I got two things that I think we should do. One, we should take every politician and put them in hotspots where these things are actually taking place so they can experience them for themselves, so that they can see, because they know that it's real. They don't know how real it actually is. So for those communities that already suffer, we need to put them in those communities so they can see just how real it is for those communities. Because we may hear about hurricanes and we may hear about flooding, but we aren't on the Gulf Coast and we're not necessarily experiencing that. And so we might not have that experiential knowledge. So that's one thing that we should do. The other thing that I think is important for us to do, as in particular for myself and Mel and Doug, who have said that they are people of faith. I know Bee is as well. We need to ignite our communities of faith and show them that this is a real injustice. This is, for our faith, what it feels like not to take care of our neighbor, not to be stewards of creation. And really hone in to let people know that that is a call to who we are called as a religious body. I would even go as far to say as a religious body universal. I've not seen yet in any faith where they tell us to destroy humanity.
I agree with that.
Or the planet.
Is part of that, for those of us who are in connectional traditions, is part of that like telling the story of people who do live in those areas to other people of faith who, might not be in an area that so clearly experiences it?
I think it involves several facets. First of all, we have to familiarize ourselves with the statements of our own faith tradition. And then most of our politicians call themselves people of faith. But when you are in active advocacy with those politicians, have you researched what their faith tradition is and what it says and how they are living up to that?
See, I think it's that formal understanding of what the politician's faith is or what their staff member's faith is. But I would step beyond that even to say it has to do with what your commonality is with them. And I think this is where it's so interesting to me when, just for Doug to talk about the Center for Houston's Future having this event and how it really is kind of a watershed moment when you have all those folks who, and even honestly in the debate last night, I don't know if people quite glossed over it a little bit because it didn't even resonate how shocking it was when the vice president said, so matter-of-factly, well, look, the climate is changing. For those of us who have been working on this issue for 20 years, that's not something that we expect from elected officials. What we expect is that they might acknowledge that it's changing, or that they might say, well, this is all attributable to, it's not really that the climate's changing, it's just cyclical patterns or whatever. So we're at a point where there's not necessarily the same resistance to whether it's happening. But I think that puts us on kind of a knife edge of, it's a very short step from, it wasn't happening, I didn't believe it was happening, to clearly it is happening, to it's happening, so there's nothing we can do about it, so I'm in despair. And I think the thing that the faith community can insert right at that point, the thing that puts us in a position to insert hope, is the lived experiences of our communities, and the way that we know that I may not have a lot in common with an executive from an energy company, but we can tell each other our experiences and find ways to relate. And I don't think we don't have to be sugarcoaty about it. That doesn't mean that we're going to agree in the future. It doesn't mean that we will necessarily say, oh, well, then I guess we have all the same policy solutions. But right now, early in the summer, I'm sorry to just kind of go on, but Doug recommended this book, which I had never heard of. It's called Solving Tough Problems. And it is by a guy named Adam, I guess he says it, Kahane. He was an executive with Royal Dutch Shell, and he ended up being instrumental in the post-apartheid South African government. I think I'll show it again. He makes the best case I've ever read, and it's a really short book. I mean, you could read it, for why there isn't any other way for us to get through this except to share our stories with each other, and to come to really understand, not that at the, deep down we're all the same, to understand that deep down we're really different from each other, but that's okay. We're made that way. And the intention is that we can live together in the beloved community, even so. So that's what I'd say, Scott. I hope that was helpful.
You used the term commonality, and I think that is the strength of our legislative priorities, is that our legislative priorities for Texas Impact were formulated by our board, which represents Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, and others, all people of faith, coming together in common. And that those legislative priorities are agreed upon unanimously. They are not, oh, I can take this or I can take that. Every bit of it.
Unfortunately, we've politicized everything. We politicized climate change. We politicized this pandemic. We politicized police brutality. We politicized racial violence. We've politicized everything. I think the most important job that communities of faith can do right now is move that conversation out of the hands of politicians and put it in the proper hands of the people and say, hey, is this right or wrong? Period. We ain't got time to waver. We don't have, and this is why I'm kind of drifting, but this is why I love my young people so much and my younger generations, is because they don't have time for the whole politics. They don't have time to play games. Either it's right or it's wrong. And the bottom line is our planet is being destroyed and we can do something about it. Is that right or wrong? People are being murdered in the streets at the hands of people who swore that they would protect or serve. Is that right or wrong? Our neighborhoods are suffering, in particular and disproportionately. In particular, Black, brown, indigenous, and poor white and rural communities. Is that right or wrong? Is it right or wrong for a community to have no fresh food for 5 blocks, but they can go outside of those 5 blocks and be at a 5-star restaurant? That's not a food desert, it's food apartheid. Is it right or wrong? Is it right or wrong for our communities or our city management to privatize all our services to the point where you can go and you have to pay to go to the library? Is that right or wrong? I mean, it's not about, for me, it's not about economics. It's not about politics. This thing is about, is it right or wrong for us to continue as a society in the way that we are, knowing that we're destroying it and knowing that we're destroying ourselves? And my young folk, man, they say it's wrong and they're going to do something about it. And I say, go ahead. I'm with you, brother and sister.
So I'm gonna jump in real quick. This is fun. It's a great conversation, and I want to come back. I want to weave some of these threads together and come back to the original question about what should we do, and talk about my own personal experience a little bit. I'm a Jew. I'm a member of a congregation. We have a green team that works to do projects like to green our synagogue and our own actions. We're now working to try to integrate our sort of green activities with the social justice committees and kind of bring these things together. And this is something I'd encourage everybody listening to do. If you're a person of faith and you're in a faith community, is get involved in whatever committee your church or synagogue and just being in there working through the issues with people is in itself, as my people would call it, a mitzvah, like just getting in there, right? Doing something. And I want to stick with a religious theme for a minute. One of the things we're doing as part of this green and climate action team that we've got formed, and it's fun, right? Like this is, I think sometimes people have this idea that this has to, it is hard work, but it's also fun. You're in community, you're meeting people, you're talking, you're building your community. And that's been a really powerful experience for me. One of my, you were talking about the young people, Reverend, my son, my oldest son, who's 13, is involved in this too. And he's got no time for this. He didn't want to hear all my nuance. He's like, no. I want this planet to be habitable all the way through my life. We got to deal with this. So it's fun having this be intergenerational. And there is a concept in Judaism, which would also be in Christianity, because it comes from Genesis 2:15, where it says the human being was placed in the Garden of Eden to till it and to tend it. And there's a Talmudic concept of Bal Tashit, which is do not destroy. Do not destroy. Till and tend the earth, do not destroy. This is a deep biblical concept. We have to take care of this planet. The thing you see on all the signs and all the marches, there's no planet B, right? And you hear in the debates and in op-ed pages and all the rest, you hear all the time, well, we can't destroy the economy. We can't lose jobs. First of all, that's a false choice. We can build a clean energy economy that has great jobs, that continues to grow our economy. But there's no economy if you don't have a habitable planet. There is no economy if we are having sea levels rise and take out cities on our coast, if we have droughts, and if we have, biblical level floods and all of these kinds of things. We have to do this work. And just the last thing I say to kind of weave all this together, and B, I'm thrilled that you read the book, Solving Tough Problems. He wrote one more recently called Collaborating with the Enemy. And it talks about how all over the world and places he's been involved, South Africa is one of the examples he used, where, anti-apartheid activists and white supremacist government got together actually and did transformative scenario planning. What does it actually look like far into the future if we don't address racial injustice? In South Africa, that meant a society in collapse, endless war and violence. And people on both sides could understand that and say, that's not a path any of us want to go down. I think we need a lot more of that in Texas, especially, of thinking about, yes, we have an economy that's very tied to oil and gas. What's a scenario where we don't deal with climate change? Because whether or not you believe in it, it's happening and the world is moving on.
That's
And
right.
we don't want to be, left manufacturing buggy whips as the world is going to motor cars. You see, we need to do that transformative scenario planning. We also have to recognize that there are a lot of people in Texas that are living near those fence lines of those facilities. And it's not enough just to decarbonize. You've got to get the pollutants that are killing people out of the air. But we can't do that just on one side of the aisle, or just industry, or just environmentalists. Everybody's got to come together and say, how could this play out? Where could this go? And how do we all build towards a scenario that continues to have a strong economy where people are employed, and we're having less people sick and dying from pollution and from the effects.
Amen. And I want to ask, sorry, Scott, but I'm just going to moderate for a second. I just want to ask Reverend Michael, one of the reasons that I thought it was really important for you to be part of this conversation is, unlike some of our more parochial issues, so, every state has things that are kind of internal to that state, even big issues like education or health insurance, but climate is not, it's not an issue that is going to recognize the boundary between Texas and the next state over. One of the things that you are really leading on is this sort of Southern strategy around climate justice. So I would love it if you could talk about Southern faith leaders and the kind of the work that you're doing multi-state.
Yeah, so we have the Southeast Faith Leader Network, which IPLs throughout the Southeast got together and decided to come up with our own collaboration where we can work together and keep each other updated on what was happening in our region. But with the Energizing the South for Energy Justice, we've expanded that throughout the South. And so the Southeast Faith Leader Network, as well as PJC, the Southeast Conference of United Church of Christ, Environmental Defense Fund, and some others have gotten together. And we have the Energizing the South for Energy Justice campaign, where we are working together to put pressure on our states from a state level to add in measures of doing weatherization and to make our commissions that make the decisions for our rates more transparent, more amenable to working with community. And so we're working that way. But also when it comes down to the environmental justice piece, things like waste, things like looking at the coal ash removal. We are also talking to one another because we understand that oftentimes these utility companies play us against each other as far as states are concerned. And so what'll happen is they may remove coal ash from Georgia, but they ship it down to Alabama. So people in Georgia are celebrating, woo, no more coal ash. But then we get the waste. And so we are collectively advocating to say no, not only not in my backyard, but not in his or her backyard either. You all have got to find another way to make this happen. In addition to, again, with the energy justice piece, advocating for just transition. We understand, as Doug had just spoken about, that, closing down industries such as fossil fuel would leave people without jobs, but we're here to say that there are other ways of making it and being beneficial and less harmful. So we're just working together throughout the South. And I must say that what I am seeing, and BM, thank you for asking me this, because I think this will make not just you happy, but the whole audience. Congregations, because of this coronavirus and they can't get in their churches, a lot of faith leaders have had time to really think about this stuff. And so I'm seeing a lot more faith leaders reach out across to me to talk to me. Like, hey, man, you might have had something right then. Because when I started doing this work, in my circle, I'm Lone Ranger. I'm out here by myself. Nobody's doing this with me. And they were looking at me crazy, like, that ain't real church. That ain't real ministry. But now that they are starting to really see the effects and seeing how everything's so interlinked and interconnected, they're really starting to come around now. So there's a lot of hope, y'all, and there's a lot to smile about. We got a lot of work to do, but we're getting some more laborers in the field now.
So let's transition from that last comment to kind of closing thoughts for everybody. One of the things that we used to do early on in Weekly Witness was close out by asking people for a moment of hope. And that's something kind of brought back during 2020 because we could all use a little bit of hope and some good news. I wonder if, kind of this last time around, you can give our listeners something that gives you hope in terms of climate justice. And if you have anything you'd like to shamelessly plug on the way out the door, this would be the time. And we'll start with Mel.
I was expecting to go last again.
Changing it up.
What gives me hope? Young people. Young people give me hope because I see that they understand the science and they are committed to making a difference. And I think it's also increasing their faith as they get engaged. The one thing that I would plug is that the United Methodist Church Creation Justice Movement is having a virtual online event a week from tomorrow and Saturday, the 16th and 17th. And the link to that is in the chat box. It's umcreationjustice.org/summit. And Bee Moorhead and Malcom are our two keynote speakers on Friday night. Woo, woo, woo.
And for those who for those who are listening, that link has been in Texas Impact's e-news for the last couple of weeks. You can get that link there.
And the important thing is, while this is the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement, this summit is not limited to United Methodist. Anyone is welcome to come and be a part of that. And we're asking for a slight donation of $10. But if you can't afford that, it just helps us cover our expenses. But we can scholarship if need be. And so it's, we have people who will be participating in this, not just from the U.S., but globally as well. And so that's exciting. And to see young people a part of it, it's exciting. And to get to work with Bee and Michael is always exciting.
All right. Bee, moment of hope and shameless plug. You're muted.
No, I'm not.
There you are. I got you now.
My moment of hope, my moment of hope, as I'm looking at the chat, I just have to say my moment of hope is our members. That we've been kind of doing this. When I first started this job, this, Scott, I said, the one issue that I don't want anything to do with is global warming, because I just think it's depressing and I don't know what anybody would ever do about it. And 21 years later, that issue has proven to be so important to so many people. And particularly, I think, I look at Lisa Brent Skelly in Houston, who's doing all the work she's doing, and Mel in Dallas. So that's what gives me hope. The thing I'll plug is our climate study, Path of Hope, which I did at one point. I put it in the chat, and I'll put it in again in a second. But the Path of Hope is a 4-part video-based study that uses video from our the most recent climate negotiations, which were in Madrid, the UN climate negotiations. And it takes video from official events that were happening there, as well as interviews Michael shows up, Mel shows up, and a bunch of other people who you all know and love. But what we really tried to do was to show how this thing that's so, in some ways, so removed from regular life, the United Nations climate negotiations, actually are really deeply related, not just to the social concerns of the faith communities, but to the work that we're already doing, that we are who's going to be responding the next time there's a natural disaster or the next time people get sick. It is the faith community every time. And that people need to understand that those things are related, that it's not climate change is big and scary and also not something that's related to my neighborhood. The work you do in your neighborhood is directly related to it. So I would encourage people to participate. And the one last plug I'll give about Path of Hope is Lisa Brenskelly in Houston with the Houston Interfaith Environmental Network, or it's the Interfaith Environmental Network of Houston, is doing a study of the Path of Hope. And for anybody who's outside of the state of Texas, I'll say Kentucky Interfaith Power and Light is doing one as well, that I think have already started or are starting right now, but you'd be able to get in on them, and that could be cool. There, thanks, Lisa.
All right, Doug.
Sorry, trying to get to that unmute button. So what gives me hope? So, well, this conversation gives me hope. Reverend Malcom specifically, I want to, I think your words give me hope. And what I mean specifically by that is I think that a lot of what has happened in the past, that what I hear from Reverend Malcom, what I hear from so many leaders, African-American, Hispanic, Asian American, all across the spectrum, is that what has happened in the past is this environment versus poor folks, that like we can't deal with both. We can't help people that are either in poverty or just struggling, living in historically marginalized communities. We can't do that and address climate. And I think people have seen through that lie and seen that not only is that not true, the inverse of that is true. Dealing with climate change is an opportunity to build a more just world. And I'm hearing that so much these days, and that really gives me a lot of hope. My shameless plug is the Texas Energy Summit, which I'm helping to organize, which is going to be in mid-November, entirely online. We have a great slate of speakers. Apropos to this conversation, the climate justice leader at NAACP, Jackie Patterson, is going to be joining us on a day that is themed on justice and health, climate justice and health. But it's not just one day. On all the days we're talking about equity and justice in our conversations about renewables and electric vehicles and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot to be hopeful for. We got a lot of work to do, but a lot to do. Thanks again for having me.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Pastor Reverend Michael Malcom, close us out.
All right. Well, I thought I did already. I ain't got no more left in the tank, Scott. I ain't got no. Listen, at the end of the day, again, it's about doing the right thing. It really is. It's about us making decisions to do what's right. And we've laid out today all of the things that ail us as a society. We talked about the planet. We talked about people. We talked about putting people and planet over profit. We've talked about community and the effects that they feel from the decisions that we make. Again, for us as people of faith, as communities of faith, and in particular as faith leaders, it is time for us to start changing the conversations, just as the prophets of old did, just as for me, Jesus the Christ did. It's time for us to start changing conversations and connecting people back to people and connecting community back to community. One of the things that this coronavirus should have taught us, it should have taught us that we cannot live our lives outside of being community. What happens to one affects us all. Dr. King said it's something like this: an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The reason why we care for our neighbors is because not only are we called to care for our neighbors, but we care for our neighbors also because it actually has something to do with us. We are under the illusion that we can live our lives individually. The reality is we can't. You can't escape this life without being connected to something or someone. It's up for us to decide what we want to leave behind, what legacy we want to leave behind. But it's also up for us to decide how we want to live in the present. If I know my house is on fire, I'm going to do something about it. Our house is on fire. Our collective house is on fire. As a society, our house is on fire. As a planet, our house is on fire. As a religious institution, universal, our house is on fire. It's time for us to do something about it. Shameless plug. Again, October 22nd, 23rd, we have our Energizing the South for Energy Justice Summit. We can do something about it. On the 21st, from 4 p.m. Central Standard to 7 p.m. Central Standard, we're going to party with a purpose. We're doing a virtual phone bank where we're calling our family and friends. We're inviting anybody that want to show up. We're going to have a DJ. We're asking our family and friends simply, go vote. We got texting. We're going to have texting going on as well. We're working with Hometown Action. We want everybody and anybody to show up. I put it in the chat. Let's come out. Let's party. Let's have a good time, meet new people, but also call people and encourage them to go out and vote. Vote. We need all we can get. Thank you for this opportunity, Texas Impact. Thank you so much, Bee, for introducing me or inviting me. Thank you, Mel, for just being everything. I appreciate you. Again, thank you all. And it's been a true blessing.
Pastor, I knew you had another word in you, so thank you so much for sharing. All right, friends, that brings us to the end of our time together today. But like Reverend Malcom said, we have work to do. We've got work to do over the course of the next few weeks. By the time we talk next, before our weekly witness episode next week, my family and I will have already voted. And we hope that you will be doing so soon and making sure that all of your friends and family are doing the same. Let's do that work over the course of the next few weeks. Remember, my shameless plug, Texas Impact has resources for you and your congregation to engage in this election at Texas or via the Texas Faith Votes campaign. So check that out. And remember that if you appreciate the Weekly Witness community, and if you've made it an hour into this podcast, I hope your answer would be yes, that you consider joining. You can go to texasimpact.org/join. Make sure that you and your congregation are members. Y'all, these are anxious times. 2020 has been a crazy year, but the world needs the faith community of Texas active and engaged. So let's get to work.